What happens when the lifeline supplying water to 27 million people is slowly sinking into the ground? Along Interstate 5, the California Aqueduct still stands. From a car window at 70 miles per hour, this 444-mile stretch of concrete looks like a flawless machine. But it's a deadly illusion. Mainstream media always tells you that California's water system is in crisis because of drought, or simply because the infrastructure, built in the 1960s, is too old. But they don't tell you the whole truth. Or perhaps their forecasting system isn't capable enough to understand what's really happening. The brutal truth is, it's not the concrete that's failing. It's the entire ground beneath the canal that's disappearing. In the worst areas, the ground is sinking at a terrifying rate, nearly 2 feet a year. A massive system, meticulously designed down to the inch to transport water by gravity, is now being choked by the very surface of the earth it rests upon. This isn't some remote engineering problem in a secluded valley. If you're watching this video and are one of the 27 million people who depend on this system, disaster is flowing directly into your home. This collapse is in the glass of water you drink every morning. It's in the ever-increasing food prices at the supermarket. And it's in your family's skyrocketing electricity bill, as pumps run at full capacity using expensive energy to push water through sinking canals. Repair costs have just broken the $3.9 billion mark. And guess who will bear the brunt of that enormous bill? But the most frightening question isn't the $3.9 billion figure. The question is, can the government patch this canal faster than the earth is devouring it? Stay until the end of the video, because we're going to unearth data from deep underground, revealing a geological cover that's being destroyed. Once you understand the workings of this layer of soil, you'll realize a chilling truth. Water may return after a rainy season, but the land that's lost will never, ever rise again. To understand the sheer scale of what's happening underground, we must first measure the magnitude of the system on the surface. The California Aqueduct is more than just a concrete canal. It's the main artery of the California State Water Project, the most complex and massive irrigation and energy system ever built in the United States. Its journey begins in the network of rivers in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. From there, the water begins a great southward march, cutting through the arid lands of the Central Valley before branching off to nourish the Central Coast, the Los Angeles Basin, and the Inland Empire. But the water doesn't just flow through the mountains. Upon reaching the southernmost point of the valley, the water faces the majestic Tehachapi Mountains. To overcome this rocky wall, engineers built the Edmonston Pumping Station, a machine that pushes millions of gallons of water uphill to a height of 1,926 feet. This is the highest single water lift on Earth. To maintain this miracle, the system consumes enormous amounts of electricity, making it the largest electricity consumer in California. This 444-mile-long concrete network carries the lifeblood of an entire economy. Approximately 34% of the water is pumped directly into the fields, irrigating the food-producing regions that feed the entire United States. The rest flows through underground pipes and out through the taps of 27 million urban residents. The water flowing through this system is not just water. It's the food you eat, the electricity that lights your home, the cost of living, and the lifeblood of a state. Everything in Southern California is connected to this artery, but its entire existence is sustained by one prerequisite. The canal must retain its original mathematical design, and that is precisely what is being ruthlessly taken away. This concrete artery doesn't collapse overnight with deafening explosions or spraying white water. Systemic disasters always begin much more quietly, insidiously, and deadly. From a car window on the highway, the water's surface remains calm. But when you step out and bring your eyes level with the original design elevation, the channel's operational form has been completely distorted. In Kings County, along sections passing through Avenal and Kettleman City, massive concrete slabs have been pulled down far below safe limits. In Los Baños, a bridge over the channel has bent and sagged so much that its underside is submerged right at the water's edge, where it should be feet away. Further east in Maricopa, Kern County, supporting pillars are slowly sinking into the ground, tearing through expansion joints at the bottom of the bridge spans and forcing the entire load-bearing girder structure into unnatural twists. A comprehensive technical assessment in 2021 uncovered between 35 and 45 serious fault lines along the entire route, faulty sluice gates, collapsing banks, and cracked linings. In fact, sections of the canal had sunk so deeply that the government had to send professional divers to measure the cracks already submerged. As the concrete surface sagged, the safe space, the fragile barrier between the water and the banks, completely disappeared. Water at these low points stagnated, losing its kinetic energy, causing the flow to be choked. The concrete is screaming, the bridges are writhing, but they are not the cause. They are the victims. These cracks on the surface are just the tip of the iceberg. The real disaster isn't happening on the concrete. It's rising from something far greater and more terrifying, hundreds of feet beneath our feet. The tranquil San Joaquin Valley sits atop one of the greatest underground water reservoirs in the American West. For over a century, California's massive agricultural machinery has drained this lifeline to nourish endless orchards of almonds, pistachios, grapes, and tomatoes. Thousands of steel drills pierce the Earth's crust, pumping this green gold day and night. But we often misunderstand this underground world. Groundwater isn't a giant empty lake beneath the surface. It's a complex geological structure where water fills tiny pores nestled between layers of sand, gravel, and thin layers of clay stacked like pages of a book. The water in these microscopic voids doesn't just sit still. It acts as a hydrostatic framework, supporting the immense weight of thousands of tons of rock and soil above. When the pumps are running at full capacity and the water is forcibly drained, the hydrostatic pressure suddenly disappears. Without the support, gravity begins to suffocate everything. The dehydrated clay layers become weak and crushed under the relentless pressure of the geological crust. The voids close. Each page of clay is pressed together forever. As this invisible crushing occurs simultaneously over a vast area, the Earth's surface above begins to slowly sink. There is no sound, no aftershocks, only silent and devastating subsidence. This is the phenomenon of land subsidence. It is so slow that it is imperceptible to the naked eye, yet it possesses enough power to break concrete and bend steel bridges. When we see the water in the aqueduct choked and the concrete crumbling on the surface, the destruction beneath the surface has actually been silently unfolding for decades. Terrifyingly, California knew this land could sink long before the canal was completed. In 1977, geologist Joe Poland stood beside a power pole in the San Joaquin Valley. 3 signs adorned the pole: 1925 high above, 1955 somewhere in the middle, and 1977 directly overhead. Between 1926 and 1970, the ground in the area had subsided by 28 feet, the equivalent of a 3-story building. It wasn't just a small sinkhole. Nearly 5,200 square miles of the valley had been swallowed by the Earth's surface. Roads were torn apart. Survey markers that had once stood level with the ground suddenly rose like monuments, not because they had emerged, but because the entire surrounding landscape had permanently collapsed. The greatest irony? California was fully aware of this fact, yet they decided to build a massive concrete structure hundreds of miles long, piercing straight through the heart of this sinking land. In 1960, when the Burns-Porter Act was passed, the design idea was crucial: to bring surface water from the snow-rich delta to the south. The goal wasn't just to provide water, but to rescue the land. If farmers had this water, they would shut off their pumps. If groundwater extraction stopped, the land would stop sinking. The California Aqueduct was more than just a water pipeline. It was born as an antidote. The engineers at the time weren't naive. They anticipated the risk of subsidence. They compacted the soil, flooding it with water before pouring concrete to compress the layers of mud. At the weakest points, they proactively built additional walls 2 to 7 feet high as a safety buffer. In the 1980s, this great gamble seemed to have paid off. Water flowed freely. The subsurface pumps shut down. The rate of subsidence slowed dramatically. The system worked, an incredible feat of engineering. But that entire seemingly perfect mathematical calculation was based on a single assumption. California would always have an abundance of surface water. However, every time a drought returned, that entire calculation crumbled. In California, droughts are often depicted through dried-up reservoirs or melting snow on the Sierra Nevada mountains. But in this story, drought takes on a far more brutal face. It doesn't just deplete surface water. It's the trigger for a destructive cycle deep beneath the surface. When drought strikes, the amount of water allocated through the state water project is mercilessly cut. In particularly severe drought years, deliveries can plummet to just 5 to 10% of what was promised. But farmers in this valley are tied to billions of dollars worth of perennial crops: almonds, pistachios, grapes, and citrus fruits. They can't let decades of hard work wither away in months. To survive, they have only one option: turn on the pumps. Drills are driven deeper than ever before, desperately drawing water from the aquifers at the bottom of the valley. That very act of desperate survival restarted the geological crushing machine. The droughts of 1976, 1987, 2007, and especially the devastating cycle of 2013 to 2016 repeated the same deadly trajectory. Drought leads to surface water cuts. Surface water cuts force groundwater pumping systems to work at maximum capacity. Groundwater depletion causes the clay structure to collapse, leading to permanent subsidence of the surface. The sinking land breaks the California Aqueduct, strangling the system's transmission capacity. When the canal fails, even less surface water is delivered the following season, forcing the pumps to work even harder. It's a vicious cycle of self-destruction with no end in sight. In California, drought doesn't just lower the lake's surface, it sinks the entire landmass. And while the collapse is invisible to the naked eye, NASA from orbit has recorded evidence of an undeniable catastrophe. From the ground, you could drive for hours on Interstate 5 along the California Aqueduct without noticing anything unusual. The subsidence was too widespread and too still for the human eye to perceive. But for remote sensing instruments in orbit, the disaster appeared with chilling clarity. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, at JPL, used airborne radar and satellite interferometry technology to map the surface terrain with fractional accuracy. What the data recorded was not just subsidence, but the collapse of continental-scale structures. The radar scans did not show a flat valley. Instead, they depicted sinkholes glowing with deadly red and orange hues. Near Corcoran, the ground had subsided 13 inches in just 8 short months. Around El Nido, a massive subsidence zone spanning hundreds of square miles is being swallowed up at a rate of 16 inches per year. And at Tranquility, the ground has evaporated by 20 inches in a single year across a stretch of many miles. That's not the rate of natural reversible subsidence. It's the freefall of an infrastructure system on the brink of collapse. Data from NASA, updated to 2024, proves a harsh truth. The rate of subsidence in the San Joaquin Valley has now surpassed even the worst periods of the 20th century. An entire valley floor is bending downwards like a bowl, silently crushing any man-made structures built upon it. But data from space only shows the surface as it falls. To understand why this fall is irreversible, we must leave the satellite and go deep underground to find something. Deep beneath the verdant farmlands of the San Joaquin Valley lies a crucial geological layer, Corcoran clay. Dozens of feet thick and incredibly dense, it acts as a giant lid, dividing the groundwater into 2 distinct kingdoms. Above this clay layer are shallow aquifers. Water here circulates relatively quickly and is partially replenished by winter rains. But beneath the Corcoran lid, a far more brutal law prevails. The water in this deep layer is fossilized, accumulated over centuries, trapped under immense pressure. When droughts wipe out surface water, desperate human drills are forced to penetrate the Corcoran clay to steal this millennia-old reservoir. And this is where the irreversible disaster begins. As the deep water is drained at a relentless rate, the hydrostatic pressure supporting it from below vanishes completely. Millions of tons of earth and rock are crushing layers of mud and clay. Their microstructures are collapsing. The water-bearing voids permanently crushed. This collapse isn't like a dry sponge that inflates when it absorbs water. It's like stepping on one paper cup. The structural framework has crumbled. Even if all the pumps in California shut off tomorrow, and even if it rained continuously for the next decade, the ground would never rise again. Subsidence at the deeper levels is a death sentence for geology. California isn't just stealing its current water supply. By crushing the water-bearing voids beneath the Corcoran clay layer, they are permanently erasing the capacity of future underground reservoirs. That stored water will never have a place to reside. One rainy season might refill a shallow lake, but no rain, no miracle, can lift ground that has been compressed dozens of feet. And when the ground isn't subsiding uniformly, the canal's foundation isn't simply being lowered, it's bending, losing sight of the most fundamental principle of physics for its existence: slope. There's an astonishing engineering fact about the California Aqueduct. Stretching 164 miles between the Dos Amigos and Buena Vista pumping stations, this massive waterway requires absolutely no engines. It flows along the valley entirely by gravity. To do that, engineers from the 1960s calculated a perfect inclination, precise to fractions of an inch per mile. Gravity is the most reliable, perpetual, and free machine. But gravity never negotiates with new terrain. It cannot bend the laws of physics to avert human destruction. As the ground beneath subsided at vastly different rates, the smooth concrete channel bottom deformed, warping into an undulating band. Deep depressions began to appear. When millions of gallons of water poured into these depressions, their kinetic energy was completely negated. The flow slowed, stagnated, and swelled dangerously. The vital safety space between the water's surface and the top edge of the concrete wall vanished without a trace. At some critical points, the subsidence was so severe that the channel bottom in front was higher than the depressed bottom behind. Technically, the water was being forced over an invisible obstacle, as if it were flowing uphill, something a gravity-driven water system could not possibly accomplish on its own. This colossal system not only cracked, but its entire operational mathematics was destroyed. To prevent the water from overflowing, engineers were forced to intervene, strangling the system and drastically reducing the operating flow. The canal was essentially strangling its own flow. This strangulation isn't a futuristic vision. It's a brutal reality unfolding right now. For the past 4 decades, California engineers have played a desperate game, racing against subsidence. They've patched up, raised the banks, and poured thousands of tons of concrete to salvage what the earth has swallowed. Pool 21 was raised in 1982. Pools 22 and 23 were reinforced in 1989. Pool 24 was further reinforced in 1996. But each patch only bought a few short years. When the next drought cycle hit, the submersible pumps roared again, the ground subsided again, and entire sections of newly built banks were ruthlessly devoured. Despite tens of millions of dollars thrown into emergency rescues, the system is losing. By December 2023, the released figures dealt a devastating blow to the pride of America's largest irrigation system. The San Luis Canal section, the hardest hit, had lost 46% of its flow capacity. In other severely affected sections of the aqueduct system, the figure was 44%. A once magnificent structure boasting a massive design capacity of 13,100 cubic feet per second was now struggling to transport less than half its original capacity. To prevent the system from collapsing completely, operators were paying an extremely high price. Because gravity flow had been disrupted, they were forced to activate massive booster pumps to forcibly push water through blockages. Worse still, They had to run these pumps even during peak hours, when grid electricity prices were highest, because the canal's sluggish flow wouldn't allow them to wait. This magnificent machine is becoming more expensive to operate than ever before, precisely at the moment when it carries the least amount of water. Repairing a sinking lifeline isn't simply a matter of pouring concrete or patching cracks. To save the California Aqueduct, a full-scale overhaul is necessary, completely rebuilding the subsided sections, upgrading the entire lining, and even adding massive pumping stations to forcibly push water past the deadly depressions. But the technical hurdle wasn't the biggest obstacle. The system's fatal flaw lay in the bills. Initial cost estimates were $3 billion, but quickly ballooned to nearly $3.9 billion. The Southern California Water Authority, the largest water buyer, faced a bill of $1.5 billion. And of course, no one wanted to voluntarily sign that enormous financial sentence. This was a deadlock within the entire administrative system. The San Luis Canal, the epicenter of the subsidence deviant, was a joint operation project. Any repair decisions required absolute consensus between Sacramento and Washington. While politicians haggle, a short-term $60 million patchwork project scheduled to begin in 2025 has been pushed back to 2028, simply because the federal government hasn't locked in its 45% share of the budget. This dying canal is scrambling for scraps from a $10 billion climate fund alongside a host of other disasters like wildfires and floods. Everything is stuck in bureaucracy. It's the cruelest irony. Groundwater control laws allow depleted areas to extend their sustainable status until 2040, but models warn that catastrophic flow disruption will occur before 2043 or sooner without intervention. This time gap is a death sentence. Meetings may be rescheduled. Budgets may continue to be debated. But gravity and geology never negotiate. The ground will continue to sink, simply waiting for humanity's decision. If the California Aqueduct continues to crumble, the disaster will not remain just on the engineering blueprints. This dying waterway carries the lives of 27 million people in Southern California. From Los Angeles to San Diego, millions may never see the canal, but they depend on it for their livelihoods. Not just urban areas, but 750,000 acres of the planet's most fertile farmland, almond groves, pistachio farms, and vineyards depend entirely on this lifeline. In small towns like Avenal or Coalinga, the disaster strikes from two sides. Their groundwater wells draw up air, while the ground beneath is deforming. As the canal delivers less water, farmers are forced to pump deeper. The more they pump, the faster the land collapses. The faster the land collapses, the more the canal crumbles. It's a self-destructive cycle, with no end in sight. Escape routes are closing. The Colorado River is drying up. Desalination plants take decades to build. California has absolutely no contingency plan of the scale to replace the water supply for its 27 million inhabitants. But the harshest truth lies in the Earth's crust. Unlike reservoirs that can be refilled, the Corcoran clay layer, once crushed, will never swell again. Its water-holding capacity has been wiped out. The California Aqueduct wasn't destroyed by earthquakes. It's being squeezed inch by inch beneath sagging bridges and a desperate southward flow of water. The structure, built to save the state from groundwater depletion, is now being crushed by that very thirst. Water may return after the rains, but the land lost is lost forever.